Welcome everyone to 52 Living Ideas. Tonight is Comprehensivist Wednesdays. This is done in conjunction with the Greater Philadelphia Thinking Society. And tonight we will be covering the whole shebang to understand all and put everything together. And my good friend CJ will be taking us through a wonderful essay from Buckminster Fuller and as well as a video by Jan Sawicki. So CJ, take it away.
Yes, welcome to Comprehensivist Wednesdays, an ongoing series of weekly events designed to foster the art of comprehensivity, our learning practices for building an ever more extensive, ever more intensive, and ever more integrated understanding of our worlds and its peoples. The value of comprehensivity can be intimated from a quote from T.C. Chamberlain. The power of simultaneous vision from different standpoints, where phenomena appear to become capable of being viewed analytically and synthetically at once. Succeeding in fully understanding our worlds and its peoples may be impossible for any one human being. However, it is my conviction that by striving toward comprehensivity, we open new worlds of learning that may not be possible through other approaches. Tonight, there are 4 segments where we're planning some form of interactive discussion after each segment. If you are new to the group, that means we will be asking you during the interactive sessions to contribute questions or thoughts about our topic. Let's get started. Tonight is the whole shebang, to understand all and put everything together. That featured quote, to understand all and put everything together, comes from Buckminster Fuller's 1969 book, Operating Manual for Spaceship Earth. When we previously explored this book in an event last October 14th, entitled The Comprehensive Thinking of R. Buckminster Fuller, I described the quote as the creed of the comprehensivist. Tonight, I will interpret the quote in an attempt to identify the nature and importance of wholeness in comprehensive inquiry and action. So the first segment, we're going to look at starting with universe. Bucky is a moniker for Buckminster Fuller, a nickname. His full quote, excerpted in our title, is, quote, "Nothing seems to be more prominent about human life than its wanting to understand all and put everything together." This quote highlights important values for our comprehensivity, our inclination for comprehensive inquiry and action to better understand and participate in the world. The first part, to understand all, gestures toward a broad understanding of the whole world, of the universe. In that October event on Bucky's Comprehensive Thinking, we learned that he defined universe as all humanity's consciously apprehended and communicated experience. We may interpret this to include our entire cultural heritage, since all the experience available to us comes from our cultural inventory of artifacts, stories, and bundles of experiences. This heritage, therefore, embodies all our possible sources for learning, and each thread from this great amalgamation of experiences of the universe we might distinguish as one of humanity's traditions of inquiry and action. In Buckminster Fuller's 1975 magnum opus called Synergetics, he suggests that all inquiry should begin with universe. Quote, problem solving starts with universe and thereafter subdivides by progressively discarding irrelevancies, thereby to identify the critical path, priorities, and order of overlapping developments that will most economically and efficiently and expeditiously realize the problem's solution by special local problem identification and location within the totality of the problem-solving scenario. We can think of problem solving here as a synecdoche. Synecdoche is a figure of speech where, in this case, the part, problem solving, represents the whole, which in this case is any arbitrary form of inquiry and action. Bucky, in this interpretation, is recommending that all inquiry and action start with universe, start with all humanity's experience. So the way to understand all is through this breadth of consideration. The breadth of our inquiry and action begins with our cultural heritage, including all the approaches, assumptions, perspectives, hypotheses, stories, rituals, and all the other accoutrements of our cultural milieu, our cultural environment, our social environment. With our breadth, we need to be wary of the dangers of the paralysis of holism, which can frustrate the effectiveness of our comprehensive initiatives. The entirety of all humanity's experiences, the whole of universe, and all our cultural heritage are so vast, so multitudinous, that our exploration can become paralyzed if we do not limit the breadth of our attempts to understand all. In our art of comprehensivity, our learning practices for building an ever more extensive, ever more intensive, and ever more integrated understanding of our worlds and its peoples, we can manage the risk of the paralysis of holism by setting our primary epistemic virtue to a gathering and adequately broad collection of sources to start our comprehensive inquiry and action. Perhaps that suggests we should aim to be as broad as we can without succumbing to a paralysis of holism. In short, identifying an adequate breadth of resources characterizes the whole we use to aspire to the whole of understanding all. Our adequately broad purview may successfully prepare us for the whole of our comprehensive understanding of everything. Or to put it more dramatically, the whole of our adequately curated breadth starts us on an exploration to understand the whole shebang. Okay, I'd like to hear if there are any questions on this introductory segment. Joe?
Yeah, so folks, if you have a question, please put exclamation point in the chat. At this particular moment in time, we're only looking for clarification questions for what CJ has shared thus far. He's just brought us up to date for those of you who have not been participating in Comprehensivist Wednesdays. So again, please feel free to put exclamation point. And Jeff.
So CJ, I'm sorry, this is the last session. It's been terrific. Thank you for all the work you put into it. I think this question might be a little bit early, but I'm curious as to how you think it might evolve that we humans get access and ability to handle more and more information, approaching what we would think of as ultimately, a comprehensive understanding, even of really important things like climate change.
I kind of see that as the goal of the whole project, is to search for a new technology, if you will, for handling, the complexities of the modern world. The comprehensivity is my attempt to build on Buckminster Fuller's use of the term comprehensivity and calling himself a comprehensivist and documenting and operating the manual for Spaceship Earth, sort of by example, his idea on how to do that. He's no longer with us, so I'm trying to build on his legacy in a sense to show that we can do it. Maybe I need, but I feel I need other people's input, and that's why we ask for questions. Are there any more questions at this point, Joe?
No, there doesn't seem to be any question. Actually, Laura, you have to unmute. No, we're only looking at clarification questions.
Well, the sense that, of unlimitlessness in terms of the information that's out there at hand, and how do we, as human beings, our brains there is limitation on our brain and our capacity. How do we begin to deal with, that unlimited? There ought to be some point at which we stop and say, okay, I'm going to take information from this point to this point because I can't take all of it. And how do we know which point is the right point, start point from the unlimited information that came up to that point at some point? You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And so the first segment suggests that we do that through defining an adequate whole of sources to scope and prospectize a comprehensive inquiry and action initiative. And it's an experimental effort. We might not hit the mark this time, but we hope to gain enough experience that next time we can do a follow-on exploration that might hit closer to the mark. Okay, Joe?
I think that's a fantastic question. I just really quickly would like to even follow it up with the idea of analysis paralysis. How do we prevent analysis paralysis with the idea of where our starting point is? I think that's an important clarification maybe for the audience for as far as when we're talking about holism.
Yeah, I'm going to talk about analysis paralysis later, but
okay. All right, then we'll come to it then.
The key idea is the adequate, and I mentioned it already, and I'll be following up on it momentarily.
Okay, great. All right. So sorry to jump ahead there, but go ahead. Let's get started with segment 2.
Okay. Before I go on to segment 2, I want to sort of give everyone a question to mull over in the back of your mind about this first segment. How does the wholeness of an adequate breadth of sources that we might curate as the start and the scope for any initiative to comprehensively understand and participate in the world, how does that wholeness shape and guide a comprehensive exploration? As I've been thinking about how questions are so important in setting our understanding, I wanted to lay out some questions that I'm not just going to answer right away, and maybe we can answer, but just to have out there as part of the infrastructure for thinking through this. Okay, let's go on to segment 2. Segment 2, I'm going to try to explain how wholes become meanings. The other half of our guiding quote, to put everything together, suggests both a process and a result or output for any inquiry or action. First, let's consider right now the process, the how of putting everything together. We can learn about the process of putting everything together from the Gestalt theory of learning, which I think is very effectively summarized in Jan's wiki in her 2013 video presentation, The Experience of Meaning, which she followed up with the 2019 book of the same title, The Experience of Meaning. Zwicky argues wholes are different than the sums of their parts, and we perceive wholes first. Wholes are both logically and epistemologically prior to their parts. She quotes Michael Wertheimer, "Parts do not become parts, do not function as parts until there is a whole of which they are parts." She marshals an impressive amount of evidence in her presentation, including the ease with which non-musicians can recognize melodies as aural shapes, even when sung in the wrong key. In addition, she considers facial recognition, literature, the five phenomenon. The five phenomenon is where there are two flashing lights, and we perceive them as one moving light. There are visual proofs in mathematics she considers, visual puzzles, and she also talks about Jonathan Schooler's research on verbal overshadowing, where language sometimes impedes our ability to think effectively. Zwicky gives a definition for wholes or gestalts. A gestalt itself may be defined as a structure, all of whose aspects are in dynamic interrelation with each other and with the whole. She explains how the structure of a gestalt experience is comprised of resonant internal relations, so that the aspects of a gestalt are interdefined. She adds, the whole is experienced through the particular, which is an aspect of it. This is possible only if every part is internally related to every other part. If it is the nature of the whole that determines both what and that any part is. Bucky describes a related dynamic in synergetics with his principle of the whole system, which states that the known behaviors of the whole plus the known behaviors of some of the parts may make possible discovery of the presence of other parts and their behaviors, kinetics, structures, and relative dimensionalities. In the 2012 book, The Design Way, the authors further add definition to this dynamic process. Quote, although it's true that the whole is greater than the sum of its parts, we must also acknowledge that the whole is of those parts. The whole takes its emerging essence from the nature of its parts. There is an inseparable relationship between parts and the whole. We also need to remember that any whole is always part of something more comprehensive, another whole. This means that there are emergent qualities of a whole that can only be revealed as transcendent properties, different from those properties displayed by the individual and separate parts of the whole, These emergent qualities are the result of the relations and connections binding the elements together in unity. Zwicky observes that even though the words insight and recognition are often applied to Gestalt perception, and that these words imply a sense of truth, in fact, Gestalt experiences may not be vertical. They may not be true. They may not truly represent reality. She cites several examples, including the five phenomenon, where we come to realize that our Gestalt perception is erroneous. Nonetheless, for Zwicky, these possibly not true Gestalt insights comprise our experience of meaning. Quote, to have a Gestalt crystallize out of chaos, or to sense the internal relations between one Gestalt and another, this, she suggests, is our experience of meaning. While Zwicky's presentation of her Gestalt theory of meaning illuminates a lot about the process of forming wholes to put everything together, how does it fit into our schema for comprehensive learning? In the event on February 17th on Mistake Mystique, we observed that knowledge is formed by guesses, hypotheses, theories, assumptions, or other kinds of assertions which stand together with the questions they attempt to answer. In the event on June 19th on the crises of ignorance, we further explain that the questions and assertions of our refined ignorance stand together to form the hypostasis, or the foundation of our knowledge. In the event on August 18th on perspective shifting, our emerging schema for comprehensive learning more deeply examine this knowledge, thoroughly refined ignorance. Our ever more nuanced questions more and more thoroughly refine and hone our integrated interpretations of the experiences, of the assumptions, perspectives, hypotheses, stories, the conditioned reflexes, and other ideas which we consider in our comprehensive explorations. As we articulate the dynamic, resonant internal relations of our gestalts with all of our questions, ideas, and interpretations, our exploration may precipitate new gestalts of refined ignorance in an experience of meaning. This is the meaning-making process of exploration seen as Gestalt learning. As we reconsider our initial whole of the curated scope, our adequate breadth of curated sources, and all the dynamic Gestalt insights we find in our iterative exploration to further refine our ignorance, we may glimpse the significance of our efforts as an experience of meaning resulting from our comprehensive exploration. In sum, thoroughly refining our ignorance with the dynamics of wholes is how we put everything together and tentatively apprehend the whole shebang. So in order to think through these ideas, Joe, I'm thinking we should break into rooms to explore this segment in small groups. I would recommend every participant in the room should take a minute, try to keep it short, to share your thinking about this material. And then at the end, there'll be a little bit of time for you to have a go around to discuss it further.
Okay. And do you have a question for them in that breakout room?
Mainly just reflect on what we've talked about. I think the main point is meaning making as a whole in comprehensive exploration, comprehensive inquiry and action. But if you've got a question or a block or an idea beyond that, the point of the breakouts is to advance your thinking by briefly sharing with others and listening to others as you reflect on what we've talked about so far.
Okay, folks. So we will go into the breakout rooms, and you can come back with your best questions, and we'll answer them the best we can during a lightning round. And you'll be in the breakout rooms for about 20 minutes. So sending everyone to the breakout rooms now.
Am I muted?
You are unmuted. So
Okay. We had a great discussion. I don't know if we answered everyone's questions, but those questions that are remaining, Katie, you might want to ask your question. Everyone is invited to raise a question. We want to crowdsource questions, and then Joe and I are going to organize them and answer as many as time permits. We have 2 more segments to get to, so we probably won't be able to answer all the questions, but we're going to try to do our best.
So everyone here, we have 4 rules. Type exclamation point to ask a question. Keep on topic. Be brief. And speak your mind. Feel free to disagree with anything that has been said, but please do so courteously. So I open it up to you for questions. Judith.
What are the mechanisms by which we refine our ignorance?
Okay. All right.
That is profound, Judith. Kind of.
And let me see here. I believe I had Vanessa next. And then Katie.
I guess, BJ, I kind of have a contradictory point of view. Let's say someone as an observer recognizes rain, and then after studying realize it's part of the water cycle, where you decide that begins, but you may see the individual event first, so you see the part before you see the whole. So if that makes any sense.
How do we turn that into a question, Joe?
Could you repeat yourself again?
Well, in this case, it's like you see the part first. Let's say you observe it raining, and then
so
maybe after further study, you realize the water cycle might be viewed as a whole. Evaporation, precipitation. I think there's another part in there that escaped my mind.
I got it. So the question is, can we perceive a part first, which contradicts what Jan's Wiki argued?
So we see the part before you see the whole, and eventually you realize they're intertwined. I think that's kind of the intention of the point of my question. Or
excellent, thank you.
Thank you, Vanessa. And Katie.
My question in the breakout room was, I had heard Gestalt in terms of psychology. So you might say, like, overall, I like him. So they say, someone might say, the Gestalt, rather than viewing them as like a sum of strengths and weaknesses. So I was kind of interested in that whole discussion, collaboration.
Okay. And Laura.
just wondering if we could think about this in terms of systems. CJ.
How to think in terms of systems. Any other questions?
I don't see any. No, I don't. So we should be able to get to all four.
Yeah.
Shall we take the first one?
Let's start with Vanessa's, because I think it's always good to start with blocks. And Vanessa's saying maybe we can see the part before we see the whole. We see the rain before we see the hurricane on radar. You know, and Jan's Wiki said, and she quoted Michael Wertheimer, that the part doesn't even exist until it's a whole. And so is Vanessa's example of it's raining, is that a part or is that a whole, or what? Should we crowdsource this one?
Yeah, so anyone who would wish to answer this question, type exclamation point, and we'll go ahead and you can answer this question, and then we'll come to CJ. Maritza.
So we touched upon this just a little bit in our discussion group, and the thought that came to mind for me was the fact that perhaps the best way to avoid the inertia of getting stuck, because you don't have the right breath, is through the motion of seeking a balance of zooming in and zooming out. So I would imagine that the answer to Vanessa's question is kind of a yes and. It's not an either or. It's a matter of, if you look at the rain and you say rain, that can be considered both a whole and a part. And it's the skill would lie in knowing at which moment it suits you best to consider which it is. Does that make any sense?
Yeah, I think so.
Let's see if I have anybody else. Judith, and then Laura.
Yeah, I wanted to really say pretty much what Maritza said, that the rain, when you see something like that, well, anything that you observe is both a part and a whole itself. So pretty much anything that we look at will inspire us to question, like what is this a part of, or what is within this whole? What are the parts of the whole? So I think we're always thinking like that and asking those questions and trying to understand it from in both directions.
Okay. Laura. You're muted, Laura.
Work on the premise that some of these things that come up have been established, they've been learned, so they've reached that point of being a wholeness unto themselves. And so that you see rain, you can go back and say, okay, this is a topic that I can look at as a whole, or I can look at now, and I can also identify as parts, because this is a topic that I can research, and so I think that it can be, you can take it from that perspective too. You're not inventing something new. You're just recognizing something that has occurred and has been learned and has been reported. And, so that's how I think about it.
I think that's a really important point, because actually, and correct me if I'm misquoting Jan Zawicki in this particular instance, but she said that the parts we experience the whole through the parts. So that this would be an example of how do we even get to a whole? We start with the parts themselves, then we identify the rain, and then we understand the whole. It's part of a bigger system. So that it's kind of an indication of how to inquire further. But that's just my thought. CJ.
Yeah, I actually think Vanessa's question ties in with Laura's and Judith's. Laura's was how to think in terms of systems. And in a system thinking, one of the questions is, what is the whole? As you build a model of your system, as you try to define what are the important parts, you look at the behavior of the parts, the behavior of the whole, as Buckminster Fuller said in the principle of the whole system. From the behavior of the whole and some of its parts, we may be able to infer other behaviors. And as the Design Way said in that segment, I quoted that the whole and the part, well, actually, Jan Zwicky said they interdefine each other. So it really, this Gestalt way of thinking makes it hard to really pinpoint what is a part, because that part, you can get out your microscope and realize that it has parts within it and it was actually a whole, but then it fits in this bigger system. And it may fit into multiple systems with various overlaps. And this is how we refine our ignorance, is by looking at the different part and the different whole and trying to maybe build a model, trying to propose a hypothesis, trying to find a perspective from which it clicks. And now we can see how the interdefined parts form this meaningful whole. When it's not clicking, when you have, as Judith reminded me in the breakout, when it's not clicking and some piece of the puzzle is not, I can't fit this piece of the puzzle in, this part or this whole that it's related to isn't fitting in, that's what drives scientists to burn the midnight oil. These are the difficulties that we face. And we want to refine that ignorance. And so we ask questions, we change perspectives, we search the inventory of our cultural heritage, we look for a new tradition. Maybe Aboriginal dreaming will bring it into focus, or maybe we need to use Schrodinger's equation. Who knows? We keep trying until we can fit the puzzle pieces together. And then that part that we thought was a part and not a whole clicks in as the whole, that when thought of in some new perspective brings some experience of meaning that, for this moment at least, is our whole shebang. 3 weeks from now, someone might point out, here's another puzzle piece that you didn't fit in. And we iterate and we try again. How do we make sense of all this?
Madeline, actually, would you like to add to what CJ had said?
Yes, I would. I think that the questions and also some examples we think and things we discussed in the breakout room are about how do you pick which part of a whole, since it's sort of infinitely nesting up and down. So in terms of, let's say, a scientific instrument like a microscope, you can look at it at a very low magnification or successively higher and higher magnifications and zoom in more and more. So each one of those successive magnifications would be called a level of resolution. In other words, a visual resolution about how you see this image. So I think that what CJ's talking about is, for one thing, it's not directive about what level of resolution to choose, nor is it even directive about what type of system we're talking about, what types of parts or wholes. It might be a human system, it might be a hybrid system of I don't know, ancient poetry combined with astronomy. It could be anything. So I think in one sense, it recommends ways to think. When you're stuck on something, you could say that you're stuck on one level of resolution. You're stuck in one part of how far you can see which part you're in and where it fits into a whole. And you can either zoom further in and look at things in their more constituent parts, or go outward and see its context. The other thing, which I thought was very interesting in Zwicky's work, was that you can go sideways, you can go vertically, you can go diagonally, you can reach outside whatever it is you're thinking about entirely and look for inspiration from something new and see how they fit together, and what happens when you mash up these two separate things, what comes out of it. So again, I think that what CJ's talking about is a language and a way of thinking about the whole process, but it's not directive about what things to apply it to and what level of resolution to apply it at.
Okay. Before I go to Judith, do you want to go to another question, CJ? Or do you want to respond?
Okay, no, I don't. I think Madeline said it so well. I don't want to take away from that.
Agreed.
So what I do want to do, I think we're going to let Judith speak, and what I want everyone else to do is, if you want, let's take Laura, Judith, and Vanessa's questions and bring them all into the table. Does anyone have anything they want to say about systems thinking, mechanisms for refining ignorance, and Vanessa's issue of the part and the whole? As I just pointed out, they're kind of related. Madeline added depth to that idea, and Judith may in a moment. And before we move on to the next segment, if anyone has something they want to say about addressing that complex of questions, we can do that after Judith. And I do want to spend a second on Katie's question when we're done with that.
Okay. All right. So
your time.
So, go ahead, Judith.
I just realized that suddenly I'm confused, because it seems like just the way we've all just been talking is exactly what she said we shouldn't or do if we're thinking of wholes. And I don't remember, did she use the word reductionist? Because isn't that what we're doing here? Like reducing things in different directions? Didn't she seem to say that if you take a whole, whether it's the rain that you're in or the water cycle, whatever hole you're in, that there is something to be understood in experiencing that whole that cannot be broken into its parts because it loses that meaning? Or am I wrong?
No.
Or I don't know.
No, you've correctly read Jen's wiki. She does critique reductionism, but if you find the passage, and I don't want to waste time looking for it, even though the essay is right here in front of me, when you parse that passage very carefully, she's criticizing reductionism as a stand-in for our way of thinking. She does, I believe, in my interpretation of Jan's wiki, she admits that there may be a value in reductionism, And I would submit that, some of us are reading Dante's Great Commedia, and there are all these issues about the many and the one. The one and the many is one of the great themes, especially in Paradiso in Dante's Commedia. And Dante has this view that he's trying to get the whole, the God's vision, the vision of God. But the only way he can do it is to continually reduce it into this question and these people and that history. And he's always reducing it, but then he's always referring back to the one and the God and the beatific vision. And I think in order to think, we need to make distinctions. In order to think about the whole as just the whole, you become a Buddhist monk and you say Om in the mountains staring at the navel for 40 years. And maybe that is one of the great traditions. You may get enlightenment that way. But I'm not proposing that Buddhism is our one and only way to get to the whole. The question is, are there other ways to get to the whole? Can we do it by other means? Or, maybe the end result of comprehensivist research is we should all become Buddhists. I don't know. But we're trying to figure that out. I want to bring it to a close so we can move on to other people.
Yes.
I would submit that you need distinctions to do thinking. That thinking brings you into dynamic relations of whole and part. But the meaning it comes in when a whole resolves itself as some sort of integral, put it all together. And it's hard to put your finger on it. We have other people that have things to say. Let's go to them.
So we have Katie and Vanessa, but I would ask that you keep your answers short, 1 to 2 minutes, in order for us to move on to the third segment. We actually have 4 segments we want to get to this evening. And so if you could just be brief with your answers, that'd be fantastic. So thank you. Katie.
Sure. I had thought about the rain. I could even analogize it to the rain and the water cycle analogy, that also rain might be like, instead of thinking it as like puzzle pieces that are the same size too, like the part might be weightier than the other part. So that's probably what, that's also thinking like from Gestalt, like maybe like a more intuitive perspective, and then the strengths and weaknesses as like like bigger puzzle pieces and smaller puzzle pieces.
Thank you. And Vanessa, please keep it brief.
Okay, this may not be exactly directly related, but sometimes an example where it may depend on what your ultimate purpose is. Are you looking to enjoy it, to experience it, to create it? And if you think in terms of music, you kind of have to realize, okay, either the tempo, the notes, the instrument you're using. So if you're going to create like a piece of music, whether it's vocal, instrumental, and you may realize you may have something off tempo in a particular instrument, but when you blend it with the others, or if you're playing music and I'm trying to create a chord, if you don't play them perfectly, it may sound awful that the cat runs out of the room. So even understanding like the mechanics of it, you may need to know the individual components. And in this case, maybe having a rock guitar, like an electric guitar with a flute may be the perfect thing until you've had the experience with it. But if you're simply looking to enjoy it, you don't need to know the technicalities of it. If it's just pleasure you're looking for, it's better to maybe just take the whole in. And the similar with Judith, maybe I'm way off, but like with if you're painting, knowing your mediums, and oil is best here, but maybe having oil and watercolor and maybe a little things that unexpected. If I'm way off, you can give me a thumbs down, Judith. But to create a great piece of art, you have to know what's coming into it. If that makes any sense.
Thank you, Vanessa. And so with that, we'll go to CJ.
Yeah, I wanted to see if anyone can address, because they know more than me, or they know anything at all. Katie's question, as I recall, was Gestalt psychology as opposed to this Gestalt theory of learning that we've been talking about, Jan Zwicky talks about. Does anyone know enough about Gestalt psychology they can address the distinction with Jan Zwicky's approach? Or maybe we don't have anyone with the right knowledge, but I wanted to give it a shot.
Maybe we can actually come to that in the end, if somebody.
Okay.
So we can revisit that maybe in the end. So maybe we'll just get started with us, the
Right.
third part of your
So
presentation.
let me conclude segment 2 with a reflection question that I'm just going to move on to section 3 afterward. We're not going to discuss. But I thought of these questions, and I think they stand as good reflections to put in the back of your mind. How can the Gestalt insights accumulated during any comprehensive initiative to understand and participate in the world bring meaning of the whole shebang into our comprehensive inquiry and action? It's sort of the question I've tried to lay out in that second segment. Now, I want to look at the output of comprehensive initiatives. Earlier, we observed that half of our guiding quote, to put everything together, suggests a result or an output for comprehensive inquiry or action. The what that we put together, so the output is the what that we put together. So let's consider the intended result, the objective of our comprehensive practice to better understand and participate in the world. Our objective may stem from our desire to better understand or act in the world, or maybe we have an intention to create a more desirable future. In each case, our comprehensive inquiry and action can be seen as a design initiative. In their chapter on the whole, the book, The Design Way by Harold G. Nelson and Eric Stolterman, they survey many ideas about the whole as they attempt to identify its significance in creating intentional change. Their ideas can help us to better assess the whole in the output from our effort to put everything together. The design way emphasizes the emergent quality of wholes. Quote, in design, when we say that something is a whole, we mean that it is a complex ensemble of relations, connections, and an underlying unifying force or principle that causes things to stand together, that we have taken together and results in emergent qualities. What emerges may be what we intended or not. Sometimes we may get stuck in the weeds. Sometimes our ideals may steer us toward unattainable futures. Previously tonight, we looked at the paralysis of holism, and that limits the breadth of our consideration. Similarly, the dangers of analysis paralysis limit us in our depth, and the dangers of value paralysis limit us as we strive to accommodate all the desires and values that we and others may bring to our initiative. In each of these cases, the recommendation of the design way is the adequate. That's what they recommend. Here's a quote where they sort of explain that. The most elusive and unfamiliar concept in design from a holistic perspective may be the idea of the adequate. A definition of the adequate, seen from the perspective of the whole, states that the elements of a whole are formed with respect to the aim and purpose of the whole, meaning that components, relationships, and connections may be suboptimized in order to optimize the performance or behavior of the whole. That is the whole of the new understanding, action, or future that we desire. That's the subject of our comprehensive undertaking, must be of adequate breadth, of adequate depth, and of adequate inclusion of values. Creating effective outputs from our efforts evidently imposes upon us a diligent inquiry to find the adequate in an ocean of possibilities in the whole of the universe, the whole of our cultural heritage, in a world of manifold desires. The design way offers this summary. The notion of the whole is a foundational property of design that is realized through the careful and creative ordering and organizing of elements through intentional relations and connections. Likewise, the notion of the whole is a foundational property for the output composed through any comprehensive inquiry and action. In dramatic terms, the whole is the whole that we output is the whole shebang. In order for everyone to think through the ideas of this segment, let's do another breakout. Again, I'd like everyone to share for 1 minute or so your thinking, where you are in thinking about processing this, just, and this segment focused on the whole as manifest in the output or result of our inquiry and action. So you might focus on the value and importance of that. Joe?
Okay. Yes. Okay. So we will go into breakout rooms, and everybody come back with your best question. Do you have a specific question to put in the chat, or do you want to?
Yeah, I just said, think about the output of our comprehensive inquiry and action, its importance and significance, or any other reflection that's driving you right now. Just share it to get it on the table.
Okay, I'll put something into the chat there. And we'll be back. I'll see everyone back here in about 20 minutes. I think everybody's back, and I just want to do a really quick promotion for this upcoming Friday. There is a meetup that is specifically focused on comprehensivism and what we've learned from the series that CJ has actually led up to this point. So he's done a series of talks. All 14 talks are on YouTube, as well as Shrikant had spent a couple of hours interviewing CJ the other day. That is also on YouTube. So you can go through and see and kind of put a lot of the connections together that we've learned over the past 14 episodes. and meetups that CJ has led. Put that into the chat and hope to see as many of you as possible there. Okay, let's start with questions coming out of the breakout room. Everybody put your button, type exclamation point, and put any questions that you may have on the table for CJ or the crowd or for the group, and we'll go from there.
The last segment was on the output of our comprehensive exploration.
Laura, you're muted. Laura, then Madeline.
I was curious one thing about CJ. What brought you to this? This has been your interest of study for quite a while, obviously. What brought you to this?
Yeah, maybe I'll just address that quickly now, and while we're waiting for other people to put an exclamation point for other questions.
Sure.
I had read Buckminster Fuller, and I was inspired by his idea of being a comprehensivist. And so 10 years ago, when the former leader of the Greater Philadelphia Thinking Society said, would you start organizing once a month topic on science and technology for the Greater Philadelphia Thinking Society, I said, oh, great, here's my opportunity to try to become a comprehensivist. And I really got excited about that and expanded the scope beyond science and led on literature and poetry and mathematics and just and then in 2019 I said, we occasionally have talks in the Greater Philadelphia Thinking Society. How would we bring this to the world, and what we do with our events. And I said, if we were to bring this to the world, what would it be? And I said, well, you know what I'd like to do? I'd like to help everyone become the comprehensivist that Bucky talked about, using the methodology that I figured out for myself over the past, it was 9 years at that point. And so I wrote up this webpage, Collaborating for Comprehensivism. And then when Joe introduced me to Shrikant last June or so, no, it was May, Shrikant said, that's what we do at 52 Living Ideas. This is a great idea. And so I've been taking the last 14 months and trying to break down into a series of bite-sized events elements and components and suggestions so that hopefully others can say, oh, I see, that's how I could practice trying to come to understand and participate in the world in this broader way. And it's an experiment. I mean, I don't think anyone's ever written a book on this. So inspired by these topics, I'm thinking with Shrikant's help, how can we put this together into like a book so that we have a manual for people how to get started, how to think about it.
So thank you for that, and we're actually looking forward to that book. So I have Madeline, Vanessa, Chris, and Judith. Madeline.
Yes, CJ, my question was actually kind of along these lines. I noticed in what you said before we went into the breakout rooms, there were two things that really stood out to me. One was near the beginning, which was that every attempt to understand wholeness is a design initiative. And the other one was near the end, which was your understanding of the whole is the whole shebang. And both of those have very deep roots in, well, I think of it as philosophy of biology, but other types of philosophy as well. And I was wondering if you could just expand upon them a little bit.
Expand on design and the whole as the whole shebang.
Yeah, that every every time that one of us attempts to understand the whole, we are in effect designing reality. We're choosing elements to look at and arranging them. And that understanding that we're able to get whatever it is going to be our whole shebang. Is that what you were saying with those two statements?
Yeah, to some extent. Let's gather the questions, and that's an excellent question. I am formulating my answer, and to give me some time, let's gather Vanessa. You said Chris. Who
Yeah,
else?
Vanessa, Chris, Judith, and Michael.
Okay, so with both for someone that's just a lifelong learner or someone that's aiming to be a comprehensivist, is it helpful to have in the back of the mind realizing, okay, if you feel like you have complete understanding, you have the whole, so to speak, that there will always be something more to it. And maybe if you feel like, okay, I can't go any farther, maybe evaluating someone else's work that you're not too familiar with, and maybe allowing someone to do the same with you, realizing, oh, wait, these are connected. So you realize even if you had the whole at this point, either 10 years down the road, there's always going to be more either build upon or extrapolate. Like never be satisfied with where you're at now.
So the question is there an end to the process of comprehensivism?
Well, no, just realize, I mean, if you're like either a lifelong learner or willing to
Right.
be a comprehensivist, having in the back of your mind thinking there's always more, it can be expanded or maybe fine tuned. Like I said, maybe saying this really doesn't belong in this like we once thought it did. Maybe we learn new knowledge about how things interrelate, so it's not really crucial to the explanation as it once thought was to be, like both eliminating and also expanding and making more and more connections, realizing you may have a comprehensive explanation that makes sense. It's ironclad to find out, okay, it's not so ironclad as we once thought it was. So never be satisfied.
Okay.
Okay, we'll try and reframe that. And why don't we get to Chris in the interim?
Do I just start talking?
Yeah, do you have? It's a question.
We're collecting questions.
We're collecting questions at this particular moment in time.
Okay, well, I'll be really brief. First time on Zoom, first time finding you. Happy to be here. We'll have a lot of questions as soon as I know what's going on.
Okay, thank you.
You said Judith?
I have Judith, then Michael.
Okay, my question is comprehensivism, by its definition, does it imply that we need to include the collective, our people, our tribe, like others besides our own investigation in the process of inquiry and action? And is that like a crucial aspect of being a comprehensivist? Looking and to, include the whole? Is that like part of the whole that we need to be including? And how does that look? Or, yeah.
Right. Okay, and you had Michael?
Michael, yes, Michael.
Yeah, I guess my question is, does a modern day comprehensivist need a special tool or filter to kind of clear the path, perhaps something you need today in 2021 that you didn't need in the 60s or 70s when this concept was first originated, because of the amount of information we take in today.
Okay.
So where would you like to start?
I really like Madeline and Judith and Michael's questions. Vanessa's, I think, adds, but it's not
Well,
defined enough to really.
We could tie it into some of the answers.
Yeah, I think
Okay.
I think it's so related to everything else, but it doesn't. I don't see it. Maybe we should crowdsource answers to Madeline's question.
Okay.
Madeline, can you briefly repeat the question so that everyone can get it clear?
Sure. And if you want to rephrase it in some way, please do. It was near the beginning of what you'd said before the breakout room. You said that every attempt to understand wholeness is a design initiative. And then near the end, you said that whatever your understanding of the whole is the whole shebang.
You know, I might reframe that as the role of design in comprehensive inquiry and action with the wholes and the whole shebang. And if anyone wants to try to tackle that, I'd be glad to sit on my hands for a minute.
So folks, do we have anybody that would like to answer that particular question?
I'd like to just augment that or expand that by saying that by design, design can be your pattern of thought. In other words, the way that you comprehend things, the way that the modes of understanding and capability that you bring to questions are a form of underlying design constraints. I take it that's what you meant.
So Vanessa would like to take a chance at answering the question, and then maybe you can go ahead.
Yeah, I'm getting there. Go ahead, Vanessa.
That's the first part of it, saying, and they're trying to figure out the whole that you implement design. Just like either coming up with the questions, you need like a strategy, whether it's a formal thing like the scientific process, doing experiments, or simply knowing which questions you have to maybe look into to maybe get to the final destination or describe the whole, or at least if nothing else, you have a better understanding of it. You may not comprehend all of it, but it makes a little more sense to you than before you began, whether it was research or looking into however you're going to find out more about it. So I think, you do need some sort of strategy versus just going out there and you're trying to find out about baseball and then you're wondering about, well, let's see what sponge or what cleaner is going to get rid of the stain that has to do with baseball. So purpose maybe.
So CJD, would you like to build on that?
Yeah, so design is a complicated word. It can mean the design is the collection of artifacts produced. When you design a book, it's the collection of ideas. When you design a chair, it's the collection of pieces of wood that were glued together, perhaps. Design can be one of the things I really like, an idea I really liked from the design way, is that when you have either an inquiry or an action you're trying to do, if you've got some objective, The first step may be to design your design, to design how you're going to design it, to design your inquiry, to so so design can be seen as a verb in that way, and it can also be seen as the noun, as the output, the thing that we produced in our design process, which might have been an inquiry. So in comprehensive approach, we're pursuing some inquiry. How are we going to understand the world? How are we going to participate in the world? How are we going to act in the world? Different initiatives may focus on different design aspects, different objectives, different goals. And so the whole that we design is, in this third segment, the whole that we design is the output of our conversation. So it's Judith's comments and Vanessa's comments and Mike's comments and Laura's comments, and all of these comments start building in each of our minds. Each of us come up with different, and all of our thoughts and takeaways and reflections, in some sense, is the output of that design. That's the best I can do right now.
So next we had Judith's.
Yeah,
question.
I think what I want to do with Judith's is, I think I'm going to answer. We're running low on time, and
Yes,
so I don't want to crowdsource Judith's question. Judith asked, does the implication of comprehensivity imply that we always need to talk about others and the collective? And, there's a lot of ethnocentrism in the world. We're getting some allophobia, a fear of the other, even in Dante, in Canto 16 of Paradiso, which I've been working on. And so there's a lot of mind share in human history about, our tribe. But when you think about it, you have to bring in some others, because, each of us was born, none of us came from anything other than a mother. It's the nature of human life, right? We all have mothers. Even if we never met her, that's how it started. And then you were thrown into a world, and you didn't ask to have the automobile invented before you were born, but it was. A couple thousand years ago, you didn't ask to be invented before the war chariot, but you were. And a couple million years ago, there were no war chariots and there were no cars. So you've got the other of your family, your ancestors, and it turns out throughout all history there have been other species, other animals. We're sort of forced into a world with others. In American individualism, we sometimes forget that the other is predominant in our world. We think the individual is primary. But in fact, we all live in social worlds. English as a language we share, none of us invented it. Neither did our parents. It was a collective thing. So I think when you start looking at the world, you're confronted with the need to address the other. Now, how do you address the other? I'm suggesting that we need to really appreciate the other and think about others that are very, very different from us. So we've explored the dreaming of the Australian Aborigines. We've looked at some. Wade Davis introduced us in the video of those who participated in that event in various trying to value the wisdom and ideas of others. So for me, I think it's very important that we include the other, but I recognize, given individualism and given allophobia and ethnocentrism, not everyone has the same value toward the other. And so maybe I'm out on a limb saying it's essential, but that's where I am. And Michael's question was, do we need a special tool in the information age to clear a path for comprehensive thinking? If I got that right, Michael.
Yeah, that was correct.
Yeah, and let me address that one so we can get on to part 4.
Sure.
And the way I would address that is, I'd say, I wish I knew. As I've said, I've been on a 10-year project to explore comprehensivism for myself, and we're now into the 15th month of my attempt to share with 52 living ideas what I learned over the previous 9-10 years. And I think I've got some ways to start thinking about it, but is it a special tool? The special tool is the temerity to try to do it. Maybe. Let me leave it there. Unless,
Sure.
Joe, do you have anything you want to add?
No, I mean, I think that's good. I think we should get started with section 4 so that we can get everybody's thoughts on that as well. And
right.
We're running a little behind.
As I've done in the previous 2 sections, I'm going to put out there a reflection question that I think summarizes what I was trying to get at in segment 3. And we're not going to try to answer it. We're just going to leave that out there for everyone to think about, see if this innovation of sharing reflection questions, works for people. How does the whole, that is the output or the actual emergent result from our comprehensive practice to better understand and participate in the world, affect our assessment of the effort? Okay. Now for the 4th and final segment, I'm going to try to pull it all together in the whole shebang. Wish me luck. In considering the Bucky quote, to understand all and put everything together, tonight we've explored 3 aspects of wholeness that are important for comprehensive understanding and participation in the world. First, we considered how starting with the universe might give us an adequate breadth of sources to curate for our comprehensive exploration. Secondly, we considered how the Gestalt theory of learning, the principle of whole systems, and the notion of emergence of the whole can help us explore the dynamics of Gestalts, which may give us a new experience of meaning, or maybe new experiences of meanings. Finally, we considered how the design way positions the importance of the whole as we design an emerging result from our comprehensive inquiry and action. There are many other ideas about the whole or wholeness which might affect the whole shebang of our comprehensive exploration. The design way surveys at least 9 additional ideas about the whole that I omitted from tonight's consideration because it would have been too much. But maybe we should consider them. The 3 that we have highlighted tonight may adequately characterize the whole shebang implicit in the quote I featured tonight, to understand all and put everything together. Again, there are 3 aspects. The whole of our adequately curated breadth of sources provides the whole shebang of our scoped topic in any comprehensive inquiry and action. Secondly, the whole of our dynamic refinement of ignorance as we process gestalts form the whole shebang of our meaning making in any comprehensive initiative. And thirdly, the whole of the emerging result produced is the whole shebang of each specific comprehensive undertaking to better understand and participate in the world. In short, we started from a whole, we create meanings from wholes, and we end at a whole. At least these 3 aspects of wholeness seem to me to be significant in our comprehensive practice. In a sense, they manifest as the whole shebang of our efforts to understand all and put everything together. So if anyone has questions about that, we're gonna take more questions. Anyone with questions?
Folks, just type exclamation point if you have any questions for CJ regarding this last segment. Laura. Oh, you're muted, Laura.
All right, I don't know, this is sort of a global thing I was just thinking about from the last section of this. And it goes back to my sort of being a curriculum developer kind of person. But as I was listening to you talk about everything, I thought about, well, what is, we're really looking at is sort of a meta of construction, the executive strategies. So we look at a problem, and try and figure out what the problem's about, and so we begin to define some variables in the problem, what this is and that, and so on and so forth. We may define them, we may give them quantitative, we may give them variables, we may not, but we clearly should talk about what the elements of the problem are about. And then we look at that in terms of what question has been presented to us in this problem. What is it that we're being asked to address? And so with that, you begin to develop, how am I going to answer that question based on what I'm given this information? And then you begin to look at what's in your toolbox. What processes do I know? What information do I have? And you begin to construct your, the gut, the gut of it, and that begins to give you your, future design in terms of, how you're extending your thinking, your mechanisms, your tools, and so on. So I look at now, I've taken this comprehensiveness sort of thing and put it into a curriculum design that allows me a structure for my comprehensiveness that also works with the ability to develop something that could be a model, that could be used by people to develop other things, where people could have a working model that would allow for sort of similar kinds of designs
Okay.
given circumstances. Anyway, so that's what I saw for, sort of moving into this realm too. Anyway, it may not be as related to this fourth session as it was the third one, but it sort of hit me.
Okay, why don't we, since that's just more of a comment. Would you like to respond, CJ, or would you like to just go to collect the rest of the questions?
I want to applaud Laura. You've intimated the whole shebang. Thank you. Beautiful.
Thank you. I can go to sleep happy tonight.
Thank you, Laura.
I see some exclamation points.
So we see we have Vanessa and then Maritza. Vanessa.
Okay, now is it possible that's the desire to understand and either understand the whole and its parts kind of be intrinsic to human nature? If you've ever dealt with a 3-year-old beyond wanting to communicate, trying to just make sense of this overwhelming world they see, just asking the questions and the questions and in search of deeper meaning, could that just be intrinsic to human nature, that curiosity that probably most of us are born with if you come across a young child?
Maritza.
So I was having a thought, and I don't know if I'm way off base here, so I figured I'd pose the question. So looking here at when we're looking at the fact that we're starting from a whole, we're creating a meaning from these wholes, and then we're ending with a whole. Would it be fair to view the second portion where you're creating meaning from wholes? Would it be fair to view that kind of similar to the way that Akoff would identify his systems thinkings, where the whole is deconstructed purely for the purpose of understanding it? Or am I looking at that too literally?
At minimum, that's one approach. Is that equivalent? I think your question is that equivalent to Jan Zwicky's theory of Gestalt learning and the experience of meaning?
I think so. That's right. I feel like somewhere along the lines you have to investigate the whole to come about that meaning. And I'm just wondering, it doesn't ever mention parts, but at some point your focus is going to shift, even if momentarily, just to help you get that understanding.
Right. We might need to crowdsource that one, Joe.
Sure, absolutely. Shrikant.
So CJ, sorry I missed much of the presentation. I'm coming in, but I'm just focusing on this idea of starting from the whole, looking for meaning, and ending up with the whole. The person I see most doing that all the time is Louis Sullivan. He's looking at nature as a whole, very similar to Dao De Jing or Lao Tzu, being open to the whole all the time, always starting with that as a whole, and then trying to find meaning. So his concept of meaning is function. What is going behind something? And he's trying to identify the function. And then he creates forms which express the function. So he's taking in nature, identifying the core moving parts of it, and creating something that tries to capture the whole, tries to capture the human experience at every possible level, the physical, intellectual, emotional, spiritual, and he's trying to produce something that has that kind of a holistic impact on people. that's the best example that I have seen. So any thoughts?
Well, I haven't read Louis Sullivan. I did watch one of your videos some time ago. It's Maritza's question too. We've got these different models: Jan's Wiki, Akoff, Louis Sullivan. How do we distinguish? Are these all synonymous and just different language games? Kirby, who's with us, told me about, maybe Kirby could explain language games better than me. It's Kirby, who's your philosopher?
Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Yeah, go ahead.
Sorry, that's Ludwig Wittgenstein. That's his later philosophy. He's really into Gestalt. So I always encourage you when I talk to you to make links to Wittgenstein because he's super uber popular and Gestalts are his thing. Part 2 of Philosophical Investigations is all about meaning as perception as opposed to just the use of words. Like Shrikant was saying, the function of something is its meaning, like a screwdriver. What it does is what it means. But then there's also when you see how it can be used to like pry off a paint can lid, that's a Gestalt thing, and the two go together.
So the question we're formulating is Akoff's deconstruction to understand, Louis Sullivan's approach, Jan's Wiki's approach, Buckminster Fuller's The Principle of the Whole System, the design way with the adequate and emergence. Are these all different language games that are synonymous and point to one whole? Or are there distinctions that make one of these language games more effective than the others?
I think the language game concept was like a principal tool that Wittgenstein used. He said, anytime you're confused about a philosophical question, make up a language game that's similar and study it. You know, he was into a heuristic approach. He wanted to teach a method for doing philosophy, and language games was like a key tool in his tool belt. But it wasn't really about deciding which one's more important or any of that. He didn't get into relative importance and such that much.
Okay. Does anyone have any guidance to provide us in trying to understand Maritza and Shrikant's question?
Well, I think Shrikant wants to actually comment. So why don't we go to Shrikant? I know Judith is next, but why don't we go ahead?
Sure. CJ, one thing that I noticed after our interview that we did this weekend is the place design way holds in your thought. So I went ahead and started reading it. And I find the concept of design I had not realized it, but it's a very potent concept because it captures both reality, your conception of it, and your production into reality based on that conception. So it's a complete loop of going from the input, the widest possible input, to distilling it with your own mind, identifying the purpose, and then fully expressing it. So I think there is something to the concept of design. I mean, clearly, Louis Sullivan, form follows function, it's all in the design context. That's a pair that he uses in order to figure out how design should be. But it boils down to design. So I think that's a potent concept because it completes the entire loop.
Should we go to Judith?
Yes, so, Judith.
Yeah, I kind of want to address the design thing also. just kind of with a question a little bit differently. So when, we're designing things with a goal in mind, so we're putting pieces together to reach a whole, right? But sometimes the holes that we make and we have our design for a specific purpose, and then we arrive at a whole, and it's more than the parts. That's what I just keep coming back to, because that's what Zwicky pointed out. And so I don't have some great examples, but I'm thinking like, okay, so when we had the space race with the Russians, we wanted to get somebody on the moon, right? So there was a lot of science that went into it, and like all the tools we needed, and created it. But it's maybe not the best example, but when it was finally done, it was more than a scientific accomplishment. And I realized actually that at that time we knew as we were doing it, it was more than that. It was something about humanity and other things. But anyway, work with me here. I think there are things that art and music and things that end up being a creation that ends up being more than the designers wanted, something beyond or extra or unanticipated, that is part of a whole that she's saying why you can't then travel backwards, break it to its pieces, and figure out where it came from always. Does that make any sense?
Yeah, I think the whole and the emergent qualities is the way, the design way in tonight's presentation, those quotes I use, there are emergent things. And some of those emergent things may be good, unexpected serendipities. Some of them may be challenges. Since I don't see any other exclamation points, I'm going to move into trying to address Maritza and Shrikant's this general issue of, we have Akoff's and other events. You all have been exploring Akoff's deconstructing to understand, and Louis Sullivan's. And tonight I introduced Jan's Wiki and gave some also quote. And the broader question is, are these synonyms? Are these different traditions? In a sense, they're different traditions because they're different writers, right? Different books, different sources. And, one of the models I've had for, different traditions of inquiry and action, in the European Western conceit of history as a race to progress, a race of progress or perfection or whatever, which I don't buy, but we, with that conceit, I wonder, if we set up a community dedicated to Akoff's deconstruction to understand, another one dedicated to Louis Sullivan, another one dedicated to Jan's Wiki, another one for Buckminster Fuller, another one for the Design Way, and we have these 5 communities that try to explore, and we let them go for 1 million years, and we come back and we try to see which of them produced more golden eggs. Well, it's going to be a long experiment. I can't predict what the result of that would be, on how can we decide, and the answer I come to when I think about this is we don't know, and we can't know. We can't know that studying the Jan's Wiki approach is going to trail the pack for the first 1,000 years and then move into the front and never be surpassed by any of the other methods. because we'd have to wait 1,000 years to find out. Even the idea that may not garner a lot of support initially, that may be the idea that takes off. Look at Aristotle. Aristotle became known in the Arabic world as the philosopher. Dante even takes that language into the Commedia as, the philosopher, as if Plato and Parmenides and all the rest didn't matter. And now we add 1,000 years to the Islamic Golden Age, and most people think Aristotle had some good first cut answers, but he's been surpassed in almost every way. The idea that today seems to be the absolute best way to do it, and we're sure that following Descartes and coming up with the right method is going to be the right method. Maybe it's only the right method for 1,000 years. Maybe we should be humble and say we don't know what the right method is. We don't know whether the Akoff deconstruction or the Louis Sullivan approach or the Buckminster Fuller approach or the design way approach is going to flower and mature in 2,000 years, but it's going to be a backwater for a long time before someone realizes why that's the right way to think about it. I don't know if that brings to a conclusion, but it's where I was thinking.
Madeline has a comment. And then Shrikant.
Just a thought on that. If you have a comment on CK, is saying that something, I can't deal with it. I have an echo. Sorry. I was going to say, is saying that we don't know what the right method is also a method?
I like that.
So,
yeah, go ahead, Shrikant.
thanks. So the way I approach it is I always approach it with a syntopical approach or the multiple hypothesis, just like multiple hypothesis. It's kind of multiple method approach where you're running all of these methods in your head in parallel. You're continuously trying to compare them, contrast them, combine them to see what you can do with it. Because the way I see it is that our understanding of human beings is very small. The grandeur of what goes in here, I don't think that we have done a good job of mapping it yet. We're kind of at the alchemic stage of chemistry, where we are trying to combine a few things and learning, oh, this is what happens when you did this. This is what happens when you do that. And that's not to put it down. That's the stage that you have to go through in order to understand things. But I think that's the stage I see ourselves to be at. So the best thing you can do is try to be a little bit like Mendeleev, where you create the periodic table of all the methods in order to be whole, and see and compare and try to organize them and try to see connections between them. Also, there is differences amongst us. What method will work better for one may not necessarily work better for the other. They might be able to get to that using a slightly different method. So there is human differences as well. So I'm all for kind of doing combination, doing the intersections of method instead of selecting one.
I think that's a really important point as well, is that the approach that we're taking and how we're looking at these models and kind of seeing what would perhaps work for us is really important. And in that, you're deconstructing your own ignorance, which allows you to kind of develop your own model. So, and then and you've given us processes for that. So.
It seems to me refined ignorance comes in each of the models, each of the approaches, each of the language games. They each give us more ways to structure with questions and define and try to hone in and define it all better.
So I don't think there are any more questions or question marks in the chat.
Right.
So do you want to make some closing remarks?
Before you make a closing remark, I just want to tell everybody about what we are doing this Friday. Yeah. This Friday, we are going to be discussing behind CJ's back. We are going to be discussing CJ's ideas behind his back. We're going to look at all the meetups that he has done. And the question is, what have you learned from this entire series so far? Both the essays and the meetups. So please come and let's start a conversation. So that's the plan. Friday at 9 p.m. I put a link to the meetup. Sorry about the interruption. Please go on.
No, thank you.
So what I want to do is I want to lay out a reflection question, like I did after each of the other 3 parts. And then Joe, why don't you do closing comments and I'll finish. So my reflection question is for the end here and the whole shebang. Do you see any other aspects of how wholeness fits into comprehensive inquiry and action? We looked at 3, but the invitation is that maybe there are more ways that wholeness is maybe something we should look for more. Joe, your closing comments?
No, I mean, I think this was a fantastic meetup, and it actually gave us another model and introduced the Jan Zwicky's model to what you've been already discussing with Buckminster Fuller's comprehensivism. And I think that this is really important because the more models that you introduce, the more opportunities we are going to be able to see what works for us. So the idea, you're starting with the universe with Buckminster Fuller and doing, macro comprehensive and micro-incisive. That's one approach that we can take. But having a understanding of the whole, or even taking Akros approach, the more that we start to integrate different models or different ways of thinking, I think the more we're going to be able to synthesize our own thoughts and our own approaches. I also think that there's a really important role, and this may not be widely agreed upon, but for something like the OODA loop, where there's a lot of iterations, and you're constantly reorienting what you're actually, the tests that you're performing. That's just one small aspect of it. But I think that this has been fantastic. I really like Jan Zwicky's paper. And I obviously like Buckminster Fuller's as well. So those are pretty much my closing comments. So I thank you for introducing this model to us this evening. I've been fortunate enough to have been exposed to this model through the Thinking Society, and it's been fantastic. And so I appreciate everything this evening and giving me more tools to think about.
Yeah. So as I've been arranging a plan for this series, I've mentioned over and over this quote from Buckminster Fuller: to understand all and put everything together. And I said, I don't think I've explained that yet. I don't know as though people understand the implications. And to me, the implication manifests through this elusive concept of the whole. So as I was trying to figure out how do I explain to understand all and put everything together and try to, address these issues of wholeness in comprehensive inquiry and action. And so I've arranged some Bucky quotes, the Jan's Wiki, and the Design Way. And it always takes me a few weeks after these events, reflecting on it, rewatching the video when it gets produced, to assess what did I accomplish and what's left to be accomplished. And the result will probably be an event early next year. So I look forward to figuring out what that next step will be. Thanks everyone for your input, the interactive and the comments. It's been wonderful.
Thanks. Thank you, CJ. And thank you, everyone. And everyone have a wonderful evening.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good night, Joe. Good night, CJ.
Good night.
Good night.
Good night.